Welcome to pattern making class. I'm Annette Julie, and today we're going to learn how to make a Peter Pan collar with a 1/2 inch stand. So you need some blocks, whether they're your basic bodice or your torso. Doesn't matter, whatever you're going to use for your design, or a casual shirt block, that could work as well. And I always like to let my students know that they should be working with a neckline that you've opened up. So here's your block, and here's a version of the necklines that I've opened up, 1/4 inch all the way around. Did that in one of the other demos. You never want to make a neckline or a collar to strangle yourself, so I prefer you start with an open neckline. So I'm going to start with the open neckline since I already have the copy and I know it's a better design. I'm going to go ahead and copy and cut this out. And I just opened it up only 1/4. That's not very much. You could certainly open it up a full 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inches, whatever your design denotes. We're cutting out the front neckline. And our center front bodice. I'm going to cut out my shoulder. And then I've got that back shoulder. So when you're working with the bodices, you need to overlap the shoulder so that the Peter Pan collar doesn't fly off like Peter Pan actually does. And how much you overlap the shoulder depends on how much of the collar you want to have a stand. So here's the neckline and the shoulder neckline meeting. And here's the shoulder meeting, and the shoulder is not overlapped. We want to keep that neckline meeting, and we want to overlap that shoulder. And if you overlap that shoulder about 2 inches, you're going to have about a 1/2 inch stand. So let's continue to overlap. That looks, about like 2 inches. This is the position I would want you to trace that off to give yourself a little roll with that Peter Pan collar. Let's go ahead and tape that down. And now we're going to grab a piece of paper. I'm going to pop a grain line in it. And we have our collars, which we've overlapped. We spread them, we overlapped them by 2 inches. You can see here it is, here to here. That was a 2 inch overlap. That's going to give us a 1/2 inch roll, so the collar will go up and then come down. Okay, so now we have a big piece of paper with the grain line on it, and you're going to line this up so that we have our center back on the fold. There we go. Now you can tape or weight this down. And we're tracing off our center front and our front neckline that we've opened up, and our back neckline that we've opened up. And then I also want to trace off the exact point that those two shoulders meet. Now I can remove this. I can bring my notch in. And now we're going to work on styling the Peter Pan. So first off, I see a little teeny bump right here where the shoulders meet. Let me go ahead and soften that. And then now you can think about styling your Peter Pan. It can be many different widths. We can, and this does not have seam allowance. So when you're putting the seam allowance, it's going to be here to the inside here. Okay, this draft started from a block and a tracing which does not have seam allowance. So your Peter Pan collar could just be as wide as 2 inches or 1.5 inches. It could do something like that. Or it could make a little dainty one like that. Or it could be a styled Peter Pan and make a point. Or a huge platter. So there's all these different options with the Peter Pan. A couple things that we want to do to it. At the center back, we're going to raise this up on the inside of the neck by 1/8. And the center front, I'm going to drop that down 1/4. And I'm going to adjust my inner style line. That will help it to not roll. Drop that down a little bit. Bring this up. And we've trued up that neckline. Now hopefully you've had time to decide what kind of collar you want to make. I think I'm going to make mine a little bit more delicate. And I'm going to make mine 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go from my newly styled and trued neckline, rotating around 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. Remember in the front I had to drop it down, the back I had to raise that neckline. So let me respect those new lines and draw style lines from there. Now let's true up that 1.5 inch style line that I just drew as my Peter Pan collar. Now I'm getting to the front and I really want to make a curve. So, and it's from that new line. Let's go ahead. There we go. That's going to look nice, just like that. Let's go ahead and add our seam allowance. 1/4 inch to the outside as well as the inside of the neckline. We're rotating around. We'll come back and connect those little short lines later. We did the outside of the collar. Now let's do the inside. This is the part that gets sewn to the neckline. Remember we dropped it 1/4 inch in the center front. Little short lines, following all the nuances of the curves. And we went up that 1/8 of an inch in the back. So make sure your seam allowance is up. Now let's take your hip curve or French curve. Let's go ahead and connect those lines and blend everything. Make it look nice and continuous. Make sure always here on the fold that you have a straight line. Right here, we're squaring that for at least 1/4, sometimes a full half of an inch. When it's on a fold, which this is right now. We're blending the outer seam allowance line. It's 1/4 of an inch. We are making woven garments. Now let's go ahead and trim off. Here we see our other choices. We could have made some interesting designs. The collar could go as well. That's a Peter Pan. That'd be really awesome. You always cut the outside line first, so it keeps the inside together, holds this together for when you're cutting the outside. Then you come back and cut that inside. A little bit of a tighter curve. This is our center back, our shoulder. Right there, that line is our center front. And we don't want too much seam allowance going past it. So we'll just trim a little bit of that corner. Then we've gone from our draft to our butterfly pattern. That's part 1 of the Peter Pan. Stay tuned for part 2. This is Annette Jouy.